So, welcome back to the second episode of Everybody Hurts podcast. I'm Stephen Bell, and today we're going to carry on talking openly and honestly about mental health, but in particular, we're going to talk to you about complex PTSD and the effect it has on not only yourself, maybe, but obviously to Chris in particular, who has experienced complex PTSD. So, I'll just let everyone introduce themselves again.
Hi there, Chris Puddy again from Sparrow Fits. I'm a personal trainer, also an ex-police officer, and I'm here to talk to you about my experiences with complex PTSD.
Hello again, it's Monica Varo from Fountain Therapy, hypnotherapist, psychotherapist, and a lucid dreaming facilitator.
Hi, I'm Michelle Ward. I'm a counsellor and child behaviour and emotional support.
And from his offices down in Penzance.
Hi, I'm Phil Wayne. I'm a psychotherapist and I've worked with addictions and trauma.
Thank you. So just remember, obviously throughout this discussion, we're not going to be offering any medical advice. We're actually just going to be discussing the issues surrounding complex PTSD. So, Chris, last week when we left off, we were talking to you about the cause of complex PTSD, and obviously Phil spoke a lot about it. But obviously we didn't get really into much discussion around the effect it's had on you and some of the things that led into some of the traumatic events after that. I think you briefly spoke about the incidents in the hospital. But then obviously this week we wanted to talk about what other effect it's had on you and your life.
I think the thing to remember with PTSD is that it can affect you in many different ways. Now, for me, it was there was a whole series and chain of events that happened. There were little things that I couldn't really pick up straight away because I had no understanding. I didn't realise what difference or what these symptoms are and why I'm being affected this way. Now, where I had the accident, if I take it back to that point there, I would turn out of my village, turn right, head towards the M1, and that's where the accident was. So every single day, I'd be going past that same spot. And no matter how hard I tried, it was always that direction I was travelling. But every time I'd come to the moment at which I was approaching it, I could feel this knot developing in my stomach, a tightness and tension coming across my chest and my shoulders. My neck would start aching. And I just felt like I'd be coming up to it and just hold my breath. And it'd be that moment where you're just holding your breath. And I have no recollection, but every time I try and reconstruct, well, what was it? Why do I feel like this? And it was little things. We went up to, IKEA for most people, even at the best of times, isn't the most pleasant of experiences. Now, going there when you've still got a leg that's only just recovered and you're still very on edge, probably not the best experience with two young children on a Saturday afternoon or whatever it was. But that whole experience of being in this environment, there's so much noise, cacophony of noise and clattering and people everywhere. And when you're going through the soft furnishing bit, if you know IKEA at all, it wasn't too bad. But as soon as you get into effectively a warehouse where there's just stuff everywhere, the noise, I was constantly on edge. I was flinching the whole time. And that was one of the first instances where I really started noticing a sensitivity to noise. And that, part of that links to, so as a result of the brain injury, I sustained tinnitus and hyperacusis, which both affect my hearing anyway. But it was this noise and this perception of things that were going on, and it's this feeling that something's going to happen. So as we were driving up to IKEA, this motorbike went screamed straight past me. That kind of moment where, yes, it was a motorbike, and I've been on motorbikes, so I understand people will filter and they'll go past people. But there's this screaming noise of the motorbike, and it just whips past you without you even realising it's there. But it feels like my heart would stop for those moments. So little things that I started noticing, things that just didn't feel right. I'd constantly feel like I was on edge and checking what's going on around me, looking behind me, thinking, I feel I'm right up there, very, very alert of everything that's going on. Everything is a potential risk.
Like hypervigilant.
Well, it was. It was exactly hypervigilance, and I didn't realise that at the time. There were. When we started going through all the sort of trauma and therapy, it turned out there were certain elements that were going on that related back to what had happened. So, if I take you back to one instant, my child running down the stairs, and he'd run down the stairs, and I'd stop running down the stairs, and I just get really on edge. And yes, part of that you could say that was attributable to the brain injury because I was snapping, but it wasn't just that. When we did a bit of deconstruction and we took it back, and I went through that in my therapy, it kind of got to that point Anne was saying to me, well, what is it about running down the stairs? I said, well, if he runs down the stairs, he's going to hurt himself. Okay, so what is it about running down the stairs and him hurting himself? We take it back a step further. Well, if he runs down the stairs and he hurts himself, he shouldn't have been running down the stairs. And so she said, so we went step by step. I'm sure if I'm not really making much sense, but effectively it was he doesn't follow the rules. He hurts himself. He gets injured. Everyone's in pain. Everyone's crying. My situation was the chap that injured me didn't follow the rules. He did something he shouldn't have. I got injured, and I'm now in this position. So I would find links and things that would take me back to those moments over and over again, but having no idea where's this coming from. I couldn't process it, couldn't understand it.
This is a very good example, just comes to mind now, how our mind is so amazing, because it will find ways to justify your need to be hypervigilant, will always find ways to show you and trigger these scary moments when I have to be hypervigilant, like looking after your son.
So, Phil, the hypervigilance, obviously a lot of that we would think from a military point of view is quite normal, isn't it? Normal behaviour. But could anyone adopt that hypervigilance?
I think, again, we go back to that primitive brain and our desire to fight or flight. And one of the instinctive behaviours in that is that we then get this rush of chemicals that help us prepare. Hypervigilance is one of those things. And so in our brains, our body is preparing for something to happen. Adrenaline kicks in, other things kick in. And so the hypervigilance thing is a natural reaction to something about to happen. And if you've got stuck into PTSD, then the chances are that if you imagine something is linked with something that caused you to then have repetitive problems in complex PTSD, then you'll become hypervigilant over a child walking down the stairs or running down the stairs.
I think that is a very interesting point, and it's finding those links, which I certainly didn't understand. And it was only a friend of mine said to me a few years back, you really need to read this book by Professor Steve Peters, The Chimp Paradox. I don't know if you've read the book at all, but very, very well-known psychotherapist. And he talks about these different parts of the brain, but effectively there's this chimp aspect of the brain. And that was what kept coming up, is that I'm under threat, I'm under risk, and then automatically everything's on fire. The problem I had, and this is one of the most debilitating effects I would say to do with the PTSD, is that it's peaks and troughs. So you go from an intense physical reaction. So you on edge, adrenaline's pumping, everything feels like something terrible is going to happen. You're catastrophizing, but then the other, so you go really high, but then the crash afterwards. The come down, I would feel I could be really on edge and losing my temper and shouting and just feeling horrible inside, and then feeling all I wanted to do was curl up in a ball, because I felt like a broken man. I just needed help.
What did you do?
What did I do?
When feeling like that, when you're in that hypertension thing, with children, they will act out and they will scream and they will punch or they will do something, run off. As an adult, what did you do when you were feeling like that, when you were in, like, say, IKEA and everything was all too much for you?
It was my wife that first noticed it, and I didn't realise. So I start scratching the back of my head, and I recognise the symptoms now, but often she sees it before I do. I start scratching the back of my head, and then I start clamping the back of my head, and I start putting my hands over my ears, and then because I can feel things bubbling up, and even now, a number of years on, I still at times struggle to cope with that. Thankfully, when she's with me, she says, right, you need to take a moment, step outside, because she can see what's happening. The difficulty I have is that when I'm in that moment, I argue. I'm fine, because I can't see it. And I have to, it's like exercising that chimp. I have to let those feelings out. And it's finding the way. The problem with, after the moment in IKEA, I left the house, got home and had a massive argument in the car because I was so on edge. Got out, went out in my car, drove down a load of lanes, and thought, I just don't want to be here anymore. And I texted my mum, so I really don't want to be here anymore. And she was, you need to go home, you need to see Samantha. But of course, by the time I get home, I've gone from being up here. I can't expect her to automatically think everything's fine and just be as supportive, because I've put her in a position where I don't want to use the word attacking, because it's not attacking, but I'm so uptight and so on edge. But when I get home, all I want to do, and I fall on the floor and end up in tears and a ball. And that was one of the biggest difficulties. Is my children at that time, I think possibly 5 and 2, 4 and 1, something like that. They shouldn't be seeing their father like that. And I was inconsolable.
That was one of the things I was going to ask Michelle, is could that almost cross trauma, the trauma that Chris is going through at that point, then cross that over to the children, so now they remember that incident as a traumatic event, but it's actually his traumatic event to a certain degree. Would that sort of help or happen at all?
Well, I mean, children will act out in different ways. I was just wondering how, as an adult, you would act out and deal with those feelings that you can't understand. Because as children, they will, scream and shout and punch and kick and then, or just trash a room,
I know this is, it's not necessarily the cure, but there has been a huge amount of avoidance. I'll be brutally honest, we were talking earlier on, before we went on air, we were talking about busy locations, facing away from the door, facing the door. Now, as a police officer, all I'd want to do, wherever we went, I would be scanning the room, and I'd be walking along the edges of the room, checking my exits, constantly scanning to know what's going on. Now it's the last thing I want to do. Now when we go into a restaurant, when we go somewhere, I have to face the wall. I have to face the wall and only be able to see a couple of people, because I can't, if I can see everything else going on around me, it's too much. Airports are horrendous places for me. We've had to change the whole way in which we do things when we go on holiday. Whereas before, in a different life, it would be me that sorts out the passports, checks everything out. Now my wife's like, right, you just need to worry about yourself. I'm going to look after the children and everything. You just need to get through. And to the point at which, when we're going on holiday, we go to the airport the day before and stay in the hotel the day before, because if we don't, even the prospect of, we could be 5 hours early, but the prospect of something might happen, my mind plays tricks on me. So now I find these little sort of coping strategies, and it's taken a long time, but okay, I won't go to certain places. Now, that's not necessarily the right answer, but it works for me.
Just for the viewers, Chris, could you just remind them, how long has that taken to get to the point where you are now? So,
well, to be honest, it's even now it's a learning process, because I see things that I do and I recognise that there's certain behaviours that I have that are self-destructive, and a lot of the behaviours I had all the way through my recovery were very destructive. It's I would push myself to the nth degree, and then I used to have it in my mindset that it's a kind of blast and cruise mentality, push, and then it'll be all right. But ultimately, what would happen? It was boom bust. So the completely opposite of what I wanted it to be. It was just push, then crash. Push, crash. And that happened all the way through till, like I say, 2018. And then I'd gone to a concert with Sam, and it was Sam Smith, listening to Sam Smith, and he started seeing the writings on the wall. And at that point, it was. There'd been some events that happened before. Ultimately, very sadly, whilst everything that was going on, my therapist committed suicide. So I felt like my safety net had been pulled away from me. But even then, and this, following another year's worth of counselling, just to do with that incident, I still learn different things. And I still find, now I know, yes, I've got to do certain things. And the sad thing is, I liken it to water. And it sounds really strange. The moment at which you feel thirsty, you're already dehydrated. So tiredness, the moment at which you feel tired, you should have taken action before. And when it comes to mental health, the moment at which you start feeling that things are not quite right, generally speaking, is the time that you should have done something before. I've tried various different forms of meditation, which I struggle with, but the time at which I think, I really should do this now, is normally because I haven't done something sooner when I should have. So a bit more. Sometimes it's got to be prevention rather than cure.
Phil, is this quite a normal effect for somebody suffering from complex PTSD, some of the effects that Chris has experienced?
Very normal, and in fact, learning coping strategies will be different from everyone else that may be watching this who has either PTSD or complex PTSD, because they will find their own ways of beginning to deal with it. And in fact, as a support group, having a wife or a partner or a friend who can pick up on the signs and help you in that journey, so that when these things won't ever leave you, you can't take a piece of the mind out and clean it and put it back in. And so those thoughts, those memories will be there. And what you end up doing is what Chris is doing, is building awareness around his family and friends so that they're able to support him through those vulnerable times. And effectively, we can't change Chris, but we can change the way he behaves, the way he thinks about things, so that he can become safer more quickly and avoid having to experience the most extreme elements of PTSD.
I think you make a very good point there, and it is to do with support. And this has been one of my big bugbears, I should say, for many years. And people don't talk, and I think we've got to do whatever we can to encourage people to talk, to say, I'm not all right, and it is, it's all right not to be all right. And we have to break down these stigmas. We have to tell people and teach people that it's okay to feel like that. And when you're with someone, and with your friend, or when you're with a work colleague, when you notice something isn't quite right, you shouldn't be asking them, are you okay, just to move on to the next subject. So they say, yeah, how are you? You have to actually probe, ask. If you know something and see something slightly different, something's changed, you have to go that extra mile. Because ultimately, if you were in that position, you would want that person to go that extra mile. Sometimes someone just needs that support.
Yeah, because people automatically just go. It's an automatic response. It's a reflex now. How are you? I'm fine.
I'm fine, how are you?
Yeah, and that's it. And I usually go, really? And that's when they
Is that
start talking.
something a child would say to Michelle? Would a child say, I'm fine, or are they a bit more honest?
No, they will do. They say, I'm good, I'm okay, because some of them don't have the words to know how to describe how they're feeling. And when I start a session with a child, I don't ask them how they are, I ask them how they're feeling.
Right.
And I, encourage them to use a feeling word. And if they're stuck, then I'll give them a little list, a chart of faces to help represent what they're feeling.
I have to say, I saw, on all things, I think it was on Facebook, a video. It was really interesting. It was I say interesting, it was I think it was a grade school teacher or an elementary school teacher. And as all the class were walking in, there's all these different styles. So there was a smiley face, there was a dance, there was a handshake.
There were different ways of greeting.
And I have it with people. I like to think sometimes, if we can just say a number, how are you today? And what are you, a 10? Well, I have to say, I say 10. I don't think anyone's ever quite a 10, because there's always something, everyone's got something going on. But if you would just say a 3 or a 4, sometimes what you need to do is make sure that the other person that you're talking to, the other person that you're with, understands, okay, if I am a 5 or a 6 today, what do I need? Do I need some space? Do I need a hug? Do I need to go out, walk outside in the air? Just so you understand there, so you don't have to give an explanation.
It's just like Michelle said, because I had clients which I did like hypnoanalysis and regression and so on, because it's childhood trauma that it's still now repetitive in their life patterns and so on. And basically, the behavior, they just don't know how to express their emotions at that age. So when we grow up and become adults, of course we don't have the words but we can associate with how I feel, right? It's irrelevant if I say I'm angry, because you'll never understand what anger feels like for me, right? It's because as children we don't have the language, we just react. We throw a tantrum in the supermarket, don't we? Or we laugh and sing along on the street. And that's why it's quite difficult to express how we really feel, so we go on automatic response, I'm fine.
So where do you think, what's been the major effect that it's had on your life? What sort of things have you given up or don't do now? Has there been a massive change anywhere, or has it taken another toll? Like your fitness was always there. Is there anything you've not doing now?
I think when you talk about things I don't like doing now, there's certain environments, the idea of being in anywhere that's particularly crowded with lots of people, I find it very disconcerting. Even supermarkets I find difficult. Just that it's the volume of people, it's that constant feeling of, I feel on edge. I feel that something's about to happen. Yeah, I know it's irrational, and I know some of these feelings are irrational, but there's something niggling inside of me that it's going to happen. And it's this feeling of not being able to put your finger on it, but just knowing that something doesn't feel right. It's little things, like I said about the airport. It's avoiding certain places, avoiding locations. I had one of my jobs as a DI when someone got murdered. It was the time at which I found out about that call. I happened to be going past a particular location, and then for the next 3 months I wouldn't drive that route because it was irrational, and I know it was rational. But in my mind, I thought, I went that route. I shouldn't have gone that route on that day. If I went a different route, maybe something different would have happened. I had no control. I was just driving my car. And the incident happened nowhere near me, but my mind would play funny tricks on me, thinking, well, if I'd been somewhere else, something else had happened, maybe things would have turned out differently.
Phil, the irrational thoughts that Chris is thinking about here, is that still in the fight or flight a sort of scenario? He's stuck somewhere there, or...?
Not necessarily, but I think the idea of your mind begins, because you're trying to find a pattern to help get you through the difficulties that you face on a day-to-day basis. You will find yourself, similarly to Chris has found himself, with a situation which then becomes a new moment of worry or concern, and it then becomes another area of possible trauma, because eventually, if you imagine your glass is pretty full, it only takes a few drops of water to spill over. If your glass is at half full, then it takes a lot. And if you've got complex PTSD, your glass is fairly full, and the chances of other things that may not be as dramatic or as traumatic then can become and have to play a big significance in what's going forward. So I think that there's always going to be the challenges. Chris is always going to face that. Might something else add to it? But I think from what we're hearing in Chris's story of the last episode and this one, is that he's coming to a place where he's learning to find how to get support, how to re-support, how to be vulnerable. I mean, if I work in addictions, and if some of the stats are very stark, if you want to give up being an addict, there's a 1 in 10 chance you can do it if you do it on your own. If you're involved with some support groups, that goes up to about 30%. But if you have a strong family support group, that can go up to 70%. And so there's a sense in which Chris's recovery and getting back to a normal life is increased exponentially by the support and the type of help he's getting, both through therapeutic work, through family support and friends. And that will continue. That's a life process. That's not just a one-off, just for a few weeks and bye-bye, Chris, you're all sorted. Because his brain is still his brain. What happens is still there. And so it's an ongoing thing. But Chris will eventually find, and from what we've heard already, that life will become a different normal, but a more manageable normal. And in fact, eventually, things will begin to change. And some of those things won't be so impressed so much. But in other times, they could. And it's not untypical of people with complex trauma.
When you said about the support, that has been I'd say probably one of the most pivotal areas. So last year, when I went, 2018, when I was at that concert, and from that point on, it was I ended up being off work for, I think it was 8 months in the end before I was medically retired. But during that time, I found that, you're going to go and buy a white car, and you happen to see white cars everywhere.
Yeah.
It's that moment. So when you're looking for something, you see it everywhere. And no matter where I went, I saw accidents. I couldn't listen to anything related at all to do with emergency services, because everything was putting me over the edge. Everything was triggering me. And certain incidents that had happened kept coming back. But when it came down to it, when we talk about that fight or flight, I have to, from myself, my own perspective, I went into freeze. So if you look at the fight, flight and freeze, and it was total paralysis. And that happened a couple of times whilst I was at work. And it happened last year, last year, 2018, I was travelling along the same stretch where I'd had my accident. And I kid you not, there was a motorcyclist on the ground, just had an accident. Exactly the same circumstances. And I had my children in the car. My wife was at home. And I pulled over and I couldn't move. I was stuck to the spot. I couldn't move, and it was a roasting hot day. I was on the phone to my wife saying, I just don't know what to do. And she had to talk me through the steps. And she'd done that whilst I was at work before, when I'd had a couple of incidents that had happened, particularly traumatic incidents, and I just didn't know what to do. My brain knows what to do, but there was the connection between my brain and the rest of my body was just frozen. And it was that complete paralysis and that freezing moment of thinking, well, how do I deal with this? How do I do? But Sam knows, what I need to do, how to get me out of that point, how to bring me back down and control it. So that really is that support element. Had I not had her, had she not been around, because it really is, the people that actually know what's going on with someone that is traumatised, yes, their counsellor, their therapist may well know, but I would hazard a guess it's probably for most people only less than a handful of people. And then it's the people that actually know what's going on but know how to interact with them to help them is even fewer.
I mean, we're coming to the end of the session now, but it's fair to say that the effect on your family has been quite dramatic, isn't it? We had a discussion the other week or the other day about it. And obviously we haven't got time to go into that detail, but it's fair to say it's had a massive effect on your wife and everyone else as well. We obviously coming to the end of it. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything that our listeners might find useful before we go, or obviously next week we're going to start talking about treatments, but has anyone got anything they want to add?
I think the thing with the effects of PTSD is you have to think outside the box. It's not just consolidated into one particular way of dealing with things. Yes, some people may react angrily. Some people may react with paralysis, with freezing. Some people may cry. Some people may be tearful. Some people may be disengaged. There is still this, I say misconception, but there's still a stigma in terms of when we look at or talk about PTSD, we think about the armed forces. Because that's where it originates from. We think back to the days even before it's classified that, and people think about the shell shock. We think about PTSD in terms of it's a military thing, but it's not. And that's where we need to really nail it down and say, actually, okay, this can affect people from all walks of life. It's not isolated to someone that's gone through a military process, a RTA, and all these different things. Any sorts of experiences can lead you to trauma.
Yeah.
Have you got anything to add on that, Phil, really, before we bring this session to a close?
Just a couple of things. Firstly, the one thing that I'm very conscious of is that Chris has become very self-aware, and to encourage people to become self-aware and work out what's happening in their bodies, the signs, the symbols. And also, what seems to be key is that Chris has had people to talk to, and part of the stigma is for fear of being labelled, or for fear of being put on that sick train, or be fear of losing their jobs. And actually, mental health and your health is always going to be more important than any job you do or any other career you might have. And I think Chris has demonstrated that he's been open, he's been vulnerable, he's made himself self-aware, and he's found people to talk to. And as we go on this podcast, we'll realise that talking is good. It's good to talk.
Yeah. As we all know from ourselves, from discussions we had the other night, even the person we were talking to the other night was fearful of coming on the podcast today, just purely because of that stigma. So we all know that happens. Have you got anything you want to add, Monica, Michelle, before we go?
Well, yeah, go on.
Oh no, well, just one thing that occurred to me, but you're questioning everything your brain's doing, to you and your body and everything, but it's actually one thing it is doing, it is keeping you safe.
Yeah. Yes, 100%. I think that's it. It's locking down because it recognises what's happening, and even if I don't, it knows. So yeah, definitely. Excellent.
Monica, anything?
No, that's it for me. I've got too many things to say, so I'll keep it for next week.
Lovely. Okay, if you want to hear anything about the treatments for complex PTSD, which we'll be discussing next week, you can obviously get in touch with us at Fountain Therapy. But if you've heard anything today, or you feel like you need to talk to somebody, as we said, do seek some medical advice, talk to people like the panel said today, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, Phil. Love you in Penzance. We'll catch up in a couple of days, maybe.